The stars above Jupiter flickered and bent in ways that nature. Space itself seemed to tear open like old fabric, and from that wound in reality emerged the warships of the Empire. 300 vessels of gleaming black metal poured through the breach, each one bristling with weapons that had burned countless worlds to ash. They moved in perfect formation, spreading across the void like a dark stain against the distant sun. High Commander stood at the center of his flagship's bridge, his tall gray figure perfectly still as he watched the blue planet called Earth grow larger on the viewing screens. His species had conquered over 400 worlds across the galaxy. They had crushed civilizations that built cities in the clouds and empires that spanned entire star systems. This small world with its single yellow sun would be nothing more than another trophy for his collection. "Begin scanning the system," commanded, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "I want to know everything about these creatures before we claim their world." His officers moved with practiced efficiency. Data began streaming across their displays, painting a picture of a primitive species barely capable of reaching their own moon. Their satellites were crude things of metal and wire. Their space stations were fragile bubbles that a single shot could destroy. Allowed himself a thin smile. This would not even qualify as a battle. On Earth, the night was peaceful over the Rocky Mountains. Snow capped the highest peaks and pine forests stretched endlessly under a blanket of stars. But deep beneath those ancient stones, buried under a mile of solid rock, alarms were screaming. Admiral Jack had been asleep for exactly 43 minutes when his secure phone began to ring. He was 62 years old with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen more secrets than most people could imagine. He answered on the second ring and listened without speaking for nearly a full minute. When he finally set the phone down, his hands were steady even though his heart was racing. He dressed quickly and took the elevator down. The elevator went much deeper than any civilian elevator ever could, descending through layers of reinforced concrete and lead shielding until it opened into a command center that officially did not exist. Dozens of personnel were already at their stations, their faces lit by the blue glow of holographic displays. Captain Lisa Grant met him at the door. She was 38 years old with sharp features and the kind of calm that only came from years of training for exactly this moment. She handed him a tablet showing the sensor data. 300 contacts confirmed, Lisa said. They emerged from some kind of spatial distortion near Jupiter approximately 40 minutes ago. They are currently holding position and broadcasting on all frequencies. Jack studied the data carefully. The ships were massive, far larger than anything humanity had ever built publicly. Their energy signatures suggested weapons capable of devastating entire continents. By any reasonable measure, Earth was hopelessly outmatched. "What are they saying?" Jack asked. Lisa touched a control, and a harsh alien voice filled the room, translated into English by computers that had been preparing for this exact communication for decades. "Primitive inhabitants of the third planet," the message declared. "You have been chosen for integration into the Empire. You will surrender all governmental authority to our representatives. You will provide workers for our mining operations. You will accept our rule without resistance. You have 72 hours to comply. Failure to do so will result in the destruction of your largest population centers. This is not a negotiation. This is your only warning." The message repeated on a loop, cold and mechanical and utterly confident. Jack listened to it twice before switching it off. "Get me Secretary on a secure line," he ordered, "and wake up everyone on the Avalon list. It is time." Lisa nodded and began issuing commands. Around her, the command center transformed into a hive of controlled activity. Encrypted messages flew across the planet, reaching bunkers and bases that appeared on no official maps. Men and women who had trained their entire lives for a day they hoped would never come receive the call and reported to their stations. Far beneath the Pacific Ocean, in a cavern carved from the bones of the Earth itself, something ancient and powerful began to wake. The entrance to the cavern was hidden beneath 12 miles of water and rock. No satellite had ever detected it. No submarine had ever ventured close enough to notice the subtle signs of human activity. The construction had taken 67 years, carried out by workers who lived and died without ever speaking of their work. 3 generations of families had devoted themselves to a single purpose, and now that purpose was about to be fulfilled. Emergency lights flickered on along a hull so vast that the human eye could not comprehend its true size. Reactor systems that had been kept in minimal standby mode for decades began to spin up to full power. Computer systems booted from their long sleep and began running diagnostic checks on weapons that had never been fired in combat. The USS Leviathan was waking up. Commander Daniel Hayes felt the vibration through the deck plates beneath his feet. He had served aboard the Leviathan for 15 years, though his official records showed him as a marine biologist conducting long-term research on deep-sea ecosystems. His wife Amy believed he spent months at a time on boring research vessels studying fish. He had never been able to tell her the truth. Now he stood on the observation deck and watched as the massive ship came alive around him. Running lights ignited along the corridors. Crew members rushed to their battle stations with the urgency of people who understood exactly what was at stake. The air itself seemed to hum with energy. "All hands, this is Captain Torres," a voice announced over the ship-wide speakers. "We have received confirmation from command. Protocol Avalon is now active. This is not a drill. Report to your stations immediately and prepare for combat operations." Daniel took a deep breath and headed for the bridge. Everything they had worked for, everything their parents and grandparents had sacrificed, was about to be put to the test. The aliens above thought they were dealing with a primitive species that would crumble at the first show of force. They had no idea what was coming. High Commander settled into his command chair and prepared to wait out the 72 hours. He had done this many times before. The primitives always spent the first day in denial, the second in panic, and the third in desperate negotiation. By the fourth day, they were slaves. He did not bother scanning below the surface of the planet's oceans. Why would he? No species had ever hidden anything of significance beneath their seas. It would have been a waste of resources to look. That single assumption would cost him everything. The history of the Leviathan began with a crash in the desert. In the summer of 1947, a small alien scout ship fell from the sky and buried itself in the sand of New Mexico. The craft was no larger than a school bus, but the technology inside it was centuries beyond anything humans had ever imagined. The single occupant did not survive the impact, but the machine itself remained largely intact. Within hours, the military had cordoned off the area. Within days, the wreckage was transported to a facility so secret that even the president was not told of its existence for another 3 years. Scientists spent decades studying every component, every wire, every fragment of alien alloy. They did not understand most of what they found, but they learned. Slowly and painfully, they learned. The first breakthrough came in 1963, when a young physicist named Harold Cooper figured out the principles behind the alien power source. It drew energy from the fabric of space itself, pulling power from the quantum vacuum in quantities that made nuclear reactors look like children's toys. The second breakthrough came in 1971, when engineers finally cracked the secret of the alien metal alloys. The third came in 1984, with the development of working shield generators. By 1958, the decision had been made to build a ship, not a small experimental craft, but something massive, something that could defend the entire planet against whatever species had sent that scout ship. The construction began in secret, funded through black budgets and hidden appropriations. Workers were recruited from every branch of the military and every corner of industry. They signed agreements that bound them to silence for life. Many of them never saw the surface again. The location was chosen with extreme care. The trench offered depth and isolation, but the there was too unstable. Eventually, they settled on a spot in the central Pacific where the ocean floor was solid basalt, and the water above was deep enough to hide anything. They carved out a cavern large enough to hold a small city and began building the greatest weapon humanity had ever conceived. Captain Torres walked the length of the main hangar deck, her boots clicking against the polished metal floor. She was 45 years old with dark hair streaked with gray and the bearing of someone who had commanded respect her entire life. She had taken command of the Leviathan 7 years ago, and in all that time, she had never truly believed this day would come. Now it was here, and she found herself surprisingly calm. The hangar stretched before her like an endless cathedral. Row upon row of Talon-class interceptors stood ready for launch, their sleek forms gleaming under the artificial lights. Each fighter was capable of speeds that would turn any conventional pilot into paste against their seat. Only the inertial dampeners developed from the alien technology made human survival possible at such velocities. Lieutenant Brooks approached her with a tablet in his hands. He was young, barely 30, with the eager energy of someone who had trained his whole career for combat he never expected to see. "All squadrons report ready for launch," Captain said. "Pilots are in their briefing rooms awaiting final orders." Nodded slowly. "How are they holding up?" Hesitated before answering. "They are scared, ma'am, but they are also ready. Every single one of them volunteered for this program knowing what it meant. They will not let you down." Allowed herself a small smile. "I never doubted that for a moment. Tell them to get some rest while they can. We move in 36 hours. She continued her inspection, moving from the hangar to the engineering section deep in the belly of the ship. The corridors were wide enough for small vehicles to pass through, lined with conduits and access panels that carried power and data throughout the vessel. Crew members saluted as she passed, their faces showing the same mixture of fear and determination that she felt in her own heart. Chief Engineer Samuel Wright was waiting for her in the main reactor room. He was 60 years old with thick white hair and hands that had been building impossible machines since before was born. His family had worked on the Leviathan for 3 generations. His grandfather had helped design the original hull. His father had installed the first reactor core. Now Samuel was responsible for making sure that core would function when humanity needed it most. "How are we looking, Chief?" asked. Samuel gestured toward the massive cylinder that dominated the center of the room. It hummed with a deep vibration that could feel in her bones, a sound that spoke of power beyond human comprehension. "She is running at optimal efficiency," Samuel said with obvious pride. "The zero-point reactor is producing more energy than we have ever recorded in testing. Shield generators are online and stable. Weapons systems have completed all diagnostic checks. Whatever those gray bastards throw at us, we can take it." His assistant Laura Miller stepped forward with additional data. She was one of the youngest engineers on the ship, recruited straight from MIT after demonstrating an intuitive understanding of the alien technology that bordered on supernatural. "We have also completed the final calibrations on the main cannon," Laura added. "Theoretical projections suggest it can punch through any known material up to 3 meters thick at a range of 50,000 kilometers." Studied the data carefully. The numbers were impressive, but numbers on a screen meant nothing until they were tested in actual combat. The Empire had conquered hundreds of worlds. Their ships had been refined through countless battles. The Leviathan, for all her power, had never fired a shot in anger. "What about the enemy fleet?" asked. "What do we know about their capabilities?" Samuel's expression grew more serious. "Based on our long-range scans, their ships appear to use some form of directed energy weapons. Plasma-based, most likely. Their shields operate on principles similar to our own, which suggests they may have access to similar technology. Their largest vessels are approximately 2 kilometers in length, about 1/5 the size of the Leviathan." Numbers pressed. 300 confirmed warships, unknown fighter complement, estimated crew of over 500,000 across the entire fleet. Absorbed this information in silence. The odds were not good. They had one ship against 300, one crew against 500,000. But they also had 70 years of preparation and the desperate courage of a species fighting for its survival. "Make sure everyone gets a hot meal before we launch," finally said. "I want this crew at their best." She left the engineering section and made her way to her private quarters. The room was small and sparse, containing only a bed, a desk, and a few personal items. On the wall hung a photograph of her parents, both of whom had served aboard the Leviathan before her. They had died without ever seeing the ship fulfill her purpose. Now their daughter would carry that burden for them. Sat at her desk and began composing a message to her crew. She had 36 hours to prepare them for a battle that would determine the fate of their entire species. The words did not come easily, but they came eventually. Above them, unaware of what waited in the deep, the Empire counted down the hours until Earth's surrender. The 72 hours passed slowly for both sides. On Earth, governments issued calming statements while secretly evacuating key personnel to underground bunkers. Citizens stared at the sky with fear and wonder, knowing that alien ships orbited their world but unable to see them through the clouds. Churches filled with the faithful. Stores were emptied by the panicked. Some people wept and others prayed, and still others simply sat in numb silence waiting for the end. High Commander grew increasingly bored as the deadline approached. He had received the expected diplomatic messages from various human governments, each one pleading for more time or offering absurd counterproposals. One nation had even threatened military action, which had amused him greatly. Their primitive rockets could not even scratch the paint on his flagship. "The deadline expires in 6 hours, his tactical officer reported. "Shall I begin target selection for the demonstration strike?" Nodded lazily. "Choose 3 of their largest coastal cities. We will destroy them simultaneously to ensure the message is received clearly." The tactical officer began his calculations while settled deeper into his command chair. He allowed himself to imagine the terror that would sweep across the planet when 3 of their great cities vanished in nuclear fire. It was almost a shame. Breaking their spirit so quickly left little entertainment for the occupation that would follow. Far below, in the hidden cavern beneath the Pacific, Admiral Jack stood on the bridge of the Leviathan and watched the final preparations unfold. The ship was fully powered now, her systems running at peak efficiency. Over 12,000 crew members were at their stations, each one trained for years in simulations that now felt laughably inadequate compared to the reality they faced. "All departments report ready for launch," Captain Lisa Grant announced from her position at the tactical station. "Reactor output is stable, shields are charged, weapons systems are online and waiting." Jack nodded slowly. He could feel the ship humming beneath his feet, eager to move after so many decades of stillness. The Leviathan was more than just a machine. She was the accumulated hope of 3 generations, the physical manifestation of humanity's refusal to go quietly into extinction. "Signal all fighter squadrons," Jack ordered. "Launch will commence in 15 minutes. They are to remain in the hangar bays until we have cleared the atmosphere and established a tactical position." Captain Torres acknowledged the order from her position in the fighter command center. Her pilots were already strapped into their cockpits, running through final checklists with the mechanical precision of people who had rehearsed these actions thousands of times. Lieutenant Commander Chris Palmer sat in the lead talon of the first squadron. He was 34 years old with steady hands and eyes that never seemed to blink. He had been flying combat simulations since he was 19 years old, and now he was about to fly the real thing. "All units, this is Squadron Leader," Chris announced over the tactical channel. "Weapons are hot. Stick to your wingmen and follow your training. We have one job today, and that is to protect our home. Let us make it count." The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. In the command bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains, Secretary of Defense watched the countdown with hands clasped tightly together. She was one of only a handful of people outside the military who knew the full truth about the Leviathan program. The weight of that knowledge had aged her years beyond her actual age. T-minus 5 minutes, a technician announced. Jack took a deep breath and pressed the button that opened a ship-wide channel. "All hands, this is Admiral," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the massive vessel. "In a few minutes we will rise from this cavern and face an enemy that believes we are helpless. They have come to our world expecting easy prey. They will find something very different. Your parents and grandparents built this ship. They sacrificed their lives and their futures so that we could stand here today. We will not let them down. We will not let our world down. All stations, prepare for immediate launch." The ship began to move. It started as a subtle vibration that grew into a steady rumble. Massive engines that had never been tested at full power roared to life, pushing against the water that filled the launch tunnel above. The cavern doors, disguised as natural rock formations on the ocean floor, began to slide apart for the first time in 67 years. On the surface, the Pacific Ocean began to churn. Fishermen hundreds of miles away noticed their boats rocking in sudden swells. Seismographs around the world registered unusual activity in the Central Pacific. Scientists scrambled to analyze the data, unable to explain what they were seeing. Then the Leviathan broke through. She rose from the depths like a god emerging from legend. Water cascaded off her hull in waterfalls that dwarfed anything nature had ever created. Her running lights ignited in sequence, painting brilliant lines against the dark ocean. She climbed higher and higher, her engines screaming against gravity, her bow pointed toward the stars. Around the world, people stopped whatever they were doing and stared. Cell phones captured shaky footage that would be viewed billions of times in the days to come. News networks cut to live feeds showing the impossible sight of a ship larger than any city block rising from the sea and climbing into the sky. The Leviathan measured 11 kilometers from bow to stern. Her hull was angular and predatory, designed to deflect enemy fire and project overwhelming force. Weapons platforms extended from her sides like the claws of some ancient beast. Fighter bays gaped open along her flanks, ready to unleash their deadly cargo. High Commander received the alert just as he was about to order the destruction of his first target cities. His sensor officer was stammering something that made no sense. "Repeat that," demanded. "A massive contact has emerged from the planet's ocean," the officer said, his voice trembling. "It is ascending toward orbit. Size is approximately 11 kilometers. Energy signature is off our scales." Stood slowly from his command chair and stared at the tactical display. The image that appeared there made his blood run cold. The human vessel was larger than any warship his empire had ever built. Its energy output suggested weapons capabilities that rivaled the most powerful in the galaxy. "That is impossible," he whispered. "Their technology is primitive, they cannot have built this." But the evidence was there on his screen, undeniable and terrifying. The primitives had been hiding something beneath their ocean, something that changed every calculation he had made. The Leviathan cleared the atmosphere and settled into a stable orbit facing the fleet. Her shields shimmered with barely contained energy. Her weapons tracked 300 targets simultaneously. Admiral opened a communication channel to the alien flagship. "This is Admiral Jack of the Earth Defense Force vessel Leviathan," he announced. "You came to our world expecting to find an easy conquest. You were wrong. Leave now and never return, or we will destroy every ship in your fleet. This is your only warning." For the first time in his centuries-long military career, High Commander felt the unfamiliar sensation of fear. The silence that followed Admiral's ultimatum lasted exactly 14 seconds. During those 14 seconds, High Commander's mind raced through decades of military experience, searching for some precedent that would guide his next decision. He found nothing. No species had ever revealed a hidden at the moment of their apparent defeat. No primitive civilization had ever possessed technology to match the Empire. His pride made the decision for him. "All ships attack formation," commanded, his voice betraying none of the uncertainty he felt. "Concentrate fire on the human vessel. We will show these creatures that size means nothing against discipline." 300 warships began to move, spreading into the same pattern that had crushed countless enemies before. Their weapons charged with the distinctive whine of plasma coils reaching critical mass. Green light flickered along their hulls as targeting systems locked onto the Leviathan. On the bridge of the Human, Admiral watched the enemy fleet reorganize with grim satisfaction. He had hoped they would surrender. He had expected they would fight. Now he would show them exactly what humanity was capable of. "All batteries weapons-free," he ordered. "Launch fighters, show them what we are made of." The battle began with light. Green plasma beams lanced across the void from 300 ships, converging on the Leviathan in a display of firepower that would have vaporized any conventional vessel. The shields flared brilliant white as they absorbed the onslaught, dispersing the energy harmlessly into space. The ship shuddered but held firm. Then she answered. The Leviathan's main batteries opened fire with a sound that traveled through the hull itself, a deep thrumming roar that every crew member felt in their chest. White lances of accelerated particles shot across the darkness, moving faster than the eye could follow. The first cruiser caught in that deadly stream simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, the next it was an expanding cloud of superheated debris. Fighter bays along the Leviathan's flanks vomited squadrons of Talon interceptors into the void. 144 small craft screamed into battle, their pilots pushing their machines to velocities that should have been impossible. Inertial dampeners worked overtime to keep the humans inside alive as they executed maneuvers that no pilot could match. Lieutenant Commander Chris Palmer led the first wave directly into the heart of the enemy formation. His targeting computer painted red markers across his display, each one representing a warship that wanted him dead. He selected the nearest cruiser and armed his weapons. "Fox 3 away," he called, releasing a salvo of micro-torpedoes that burned toward his target with single-minded purpose. The torpedoes struck the cruiser amidships, punching through its shields with ease and detonating inside the hull. Secondary explosions rippled along the length of the ship as its internal systems catastrophically failed. Chris was already banking hard toward his next target before the first one finished dying. All around him, his fellow pilots were engaging the enemy with the same deadly efficiency. Talons danced between capital ships, too fast and too agile for the weapons to track. They struck like hornets, delivering devastating blows and then vanishing before retaliation could follow. On the tactical deck of the Leviathan, Captain Lisa Grant coordinated the battle with the cold precision of a surgeon. Her holographic display showed the position of every ship in the battle, both friendly and hostile. She issued orders in a calm voice that never wavered. "Sierra Squadron, cover the port batteries. Delta Wing, intercept those incoming bombers. Point defense systems, you are weapons-free on all hostile fighters." The space around Earth had become a maelstrom of light and death. Ships fell one after another, their commanders unable to comprehend how a single enemy vessel could be everywhere at once. The Leviathan's weapons seemed to strike from impossible angles, guided by targeting computers that calculated firing solutions faster than any organic mind could process. High Commander watched his tactical display with growing horror. Over 100 ships destroyed or disabled in the first hour of combat. The human fighters were cutting through his formations like predators through a herd of prey animals. Nothing he ordered seemed to make any difference. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "Their technology was supposed to be primitive. They were supposed to be helpless." His tactical officer had no answer. The data streaming across his console told a story that everything they knew about the galaxy. The humans were not just matching firepower. They were exceeding it by a significant margin. Captain Torres watched the battle unfold from her position in the fighter command center. Her pilots were performing beyond all expectations, their years of simulation training translating perfectly into real combat effectiveness. But she also saw the cost. 3 Talons had already been destroyed, their pilots lost forever. More would follow before the day was done. "Green Squadron, pull back and regroup," she ordered. "You are getting too close to their flagship's defensive grid." The pilots obeyed instantly, breaking off their attack run and reforming at a safe distance. Discipline was what would win this battle, not reckless heroism. In the engineering section, Chief Engineer Samuel Wright monitored the power systems with growing concern. The shields were holding, but each hit from the enemy fleet drained energy that had to be replenished from the main reactor. They could not sustain this level of combat indefinitely. "Laura, reroute auxiliary power to the forward shield generators," he ordered. "We need to buy the Admiral more time." Laura Miller's fingers flew across her console. Rerouting now, shield strength increasing by 12%. On the bridge, Admiral studied the tactical display with the experienced eye of a man who had spent his entire career preparing for this moment. The battle was going well, but the still had numbers on their side. He needed to end this quickly before attrition turned against them. "Target the enemy flagship," he ordered. "All main batteries full power." The Leviathan's bow swung towards command ship. Every forward weapon charged simultaneously, drawing power from the zero-point reactor in quantities that made the lights flicker throughout the vessel. Then, as one, they fired. The beam that struck the flagship was so bright that crew members on both sides had to look away. It punched through the alien ship's shields like they were not even there. It carved through deck after deck of armored hull. It did not stop until it emerged from the other side, continuing into deep space before finally dissipating. High Commander felt his ship dying around him. Alarms screamed from every console. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut as entire sections of the vessel were exposed to vacuum. The lights failed and were replaced by the dim red glow of backup power. "All ships," he croaked into his communication system, "retreat. Fall back to the hyperspace rendezvous point. We are withdrawing." The surviving vessels broke formation and fled. They activated their hyperspace drives without waiting for proper calculations, so desperate were they to escape the nightmare that the battle had become. One by one they vanished, leaving behind the burning wreckage of their fallen comrades. Of the 300 warships that had arrived with such confidence, only 87 escaped. The rest were scattered across Earth's orbital space as debris and memory. Admiral slumped back in his command chair, exhaustion finally catching up with him. They had done it. Against all odds, against an enemy that had conquered hundreds of worlds, humanity had won. The celebrations could wait. Right now, he just wanted to close his eyes for a moment. Around him, his crew began the long work of damage assessment and survivor recovery. The battle was over, but their mission had only just begun. The news spread across the planet faster than any event in human history. Within hours of the battle's end, every person on Earth knew that they had been saved by a ship they never knew existed. Cell phone footage of the Leviathan rising from the ocean was viewed billions of times. Amateur astronomers captured images of the battle that would fill museums for generations. The world had changed forever, and everyone could feel it. President addressed the United Nations 3 days after the battle. The assembly hall was packed with delegates from every nation on Earth, all of them still struggling to process what had happened. Cameras broadcast his words to an audience of billions. "For 70 years, our predecessors kept a secret that protected us all," President began. "Men and women who dedicated their lives to building a shield for our world, knowing they might never live to see it used. Scientists who made discoveries they could never publish. Engineers who created marvels they could never speak of. Soldiers who served in silence, year after year, waiting for a day they hoped would never come. He paused, allowing his words to settle over the assembly. That day came, and we were ready. Today, I am authorizing the full declassification of the Avalon program. The people of Earth deserve to know the truth about how they were protected and the sacrifices that made that protection possible. In the weeks that followed, the secrets came pouring out. Documents that had been buried in classified archives for decades were released to the public. The story of the 1947 crash was finally told in full. The faces of the men and women who had built the Leviathan were shown on screens around the world. Memorial services were held for those who had died keeping the secret, their contributions finally recognized by a grateful humanity. Admiral Jack became an overnight celebrity, though he did his best to avoid the attention. He gave exactly one interview, speaking quietly about the crew members who had made victory possible. When asked how it felt to command the ship that saved humanity, he simply shook his head. "I did not save anyone," he said. "The 12,000 men and women aboard the Leviathan saved us. The scientists who spent their lives understanding the alien technology saved us. The workers who built that ship in secret saved us. I just gave the orders." The Empire received word of their fleet's destruction within days of the surviving ships returning home. The news spread through their territory like a shockwave. For the first time in their long history of conquest, an invasion fleet had been not just defeated but devastated. An unknown species from an uncharted world had done what no other civilization had ever accomplished. The political consequences were immediate and severe. High Commander was stripped of his rank and exiled to a prison colony on the edge of space. The Emperor himself was forced to address his subjects, attempting to explain how such a disaster had occurred. His explanations satisfied no one. More importantly, the conquered worlds of the Empire began to stir. If the humans could resist, perhaps others could too. Rebellions that had been brewing quietly for centuries suddenly found new hope. The empire that had seemed invincible was now revealed to have weaknesses, and its subjects were eager to exploit them. Captain Torres was promoted to Rear Admiral and given command of the newly formed Earth Defense Fleet. The Leviathan underwent extensive repairs and upgrades, incorporating lessons learned from the battle. Two sister ships, the Titan and the Sovereign, were under construction in expanded facilities that no longer needed to hide. "We cannot assume they will not return," explained during a briefing to the world's leaders. "They may have suffered a defeat, but their empire is vast. If they decide to send a larger force, we need to be ready." Resources that had once been spent on national conflicts were redirected toward planetary defense. Old enemies became allies in the face of a universe that had suddenly become much larger and more dangerous. The petty disputes that had divided humanity for centuries seemed absurd when compared to the threat that existed among the stars. Commander Daniel Hayes finally told his wife Amy the truth about his work. He took her to a secure facility and showed her recordings of his life aboard the Leviathan. He explained the years of secrecy, the missions he could never discuss, the friends who had died without recognition. She listened without interrupting, her face moving through expressions of shock and wonder and finally pride. "I married a hero," she said when he finished, "and I never even knew it." Daniel shook his head. "I am not a hero, I just did my job." That is exactly what a hero would say. 3 months after the battle, the Leviathan was opened for limited public tour. Citizens from around the world applied for the chance to walk the corridors of the ship that had saved their planet. They stood in the massive hangars where fighters had launched into battle. They visited the engineering section, where the zero-point reactor hummed with endless power. They looked out from the observation deck at a planet that had come so close to destruction. Admiral led the first tour personally. He walked among the crowd of ordinary people, answering their questions with the patience of a man who understood that the ship no longer belonged only to its crew. It belonged to all of humanity. "What happens now?" a young girl asked him near the end of the tour. Looked out through the observation window at the Earth turning slowly below. The blue of the oceans, the green of the forests, the white of the clouds, everything they had fought to protect. "Now we keep building," he said. "We make more ships, we train more crews, we reach out to other worlds that have suffered under the Empire. We show the galaxy that humanity is here to stay." The girl nodded solemnly, as if she understood the weight of those words. Human diplomats began making contact with former subjects, offering friendship instead of domination. Some were suspicious, unable to believe that any species could be different from their former masters. Others welcomed the newcomers with tears of joy. Slowly, carefully, alliances were formed. A new power was rising in the galaxy, built not on conquest but on cooperation. The stars that had once seemed so threatening now beckoned with possibility. There was so much to learn, so much to explore, so much to build. The universe was vast and full of wonders, and humanity was finally ready to take its place among them. In his small office aboard the Leviathan, Admiral kept a photograph on his desk. It showed his grandfather, a young man in a military uniform, standing in front of the first section of hull plating ever installed on the ship. His grandfather had died long before the Leviathan was finished, but his dream had finally come true. Touched the photograph gently and smiled. "We did it," he said softly. "We really did it." Outside, the stars waited with infinite patience. Humanity had proven itself worthy to walk among them. The journey was only beginning.